And this is Criminal Behaviorology. I'm your host for Criminal Behaviorology, Timothy Joseph. And what is Criminal Behaviorology? It is the use of behavior analysis to further the study of criminology or otherwise assist in criminal or civil legal proceedings, as well as juvenile or adult correctional programs. And there are many areas of interest, and I had produced a poster for this very topic at a recent conference, a recent ABAI conference, Association of Behavior Analysis International. And on that poster, I listed several articles and that met the criteria for this particular area of study. And it was listed as literature on crime and behavior analysis. I also listed I featured a graph of the number of articles in the Journal of Behavior Analysis related to crime, delinquency, and or forensics. And there was a few in 1995. That was the year that we started. If we went from 1995 to 2017, 1995 had 4 articles in it. The other years had very few. 2014 ended up having 3, surprisingly, and there was 1 in 2016. My entire review of the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis from 1995 to 2017. Now, one particular article that I want to focus on today was in 1995. It was in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. It is Eliminating the Battering of Women by Men, Some Considerations for Behavior Analysis by David L. Myers of Edison Community College. And I'm going to go over the abstract for that. Based on review of representative literature, history, and current research indicate that battering by male partners is a major health problem for women. Use of physical aggression and verbal coercion can be described by 3-term contingencies involving escape, avoidance, punishment, and positive reinforcement. These contingencies occur within societal practices, rules, and models that involve oppression of women and insubstantial consequences for men who batter. The difficulties in directly observing a couple's interactions and their aggression have been a methodological barrier to the involvement of behavior analysis and treatment of and research on domestic violence. Recommendations are made for behavior analysis to contribute to reducing battering through development and analysis of program components and application of contingency management and behavioral training technology. I hope you agree with me that this is a very ideal article for our purposes here at Criminal Behaviorology. It isn't so much that we may have an interest in this particular issue, although it is an important one. I think this is particularly ripe, as we would say, for the use of behavior analysis to apply to criminology. And this article, I think, as we saw in the abstract, gives some reasons why. And I'm going to read over some select portions of it here. And it gives some background, some of the importance. Estimates are that 1.8 to 4 million women are assaulted by their current or former male partners each year, according to the literature. Brown, 1993, estimated that between 21% and 34% of all women will be physically assaulted during adulthood by a male partner. A woman is more likely to be assaulted and injured, raped, or killed by a current or former partner than by all other assailants combined. Brown and Williams, 1989. Strauss and Gellis, Gelles, reviewed 15 studies that had used what is called the conflict tactics scales and found that a median of 21% of husbands were reported to have used physical aggression, and 3.4% to 6% of husbands were reported to have used severe violence in the last year. The figures for women's violence against their husbands were slightly higher, according to Strauss and Gellis, 1990. Found that 12.4% of women were reported to have used physical aggression and 4.8% used severe violence. A total of 10 studies found a median of 24% of women using physical aggression and 5% using severe violence. Some studies used non-random or volunteer samples. Now the article does go on a little bit about perhaps a qualitative difference between a man battering a woman versus a woman battering a man, and brings some clarity. It gives clarity to the issue. It shows that just looking at raw numbers is not the whole story, but I'll go on with another section of the article. In intra-couple assault, women are injured far more often than men are. From the National Crime Survey data, Schwartz, 1987, found that the woman was the injured party in 95% of the instances in which an injury was sustained. Stetz, S-T-E-T-S, and Strauss, 1990, found that more women than men reported needing to see a doctor and taking more time off work as a result of partner assault. The woman was the victim and the man was the perpetrator in 2/3 of the homicides involving married and dating couples between 1983 and 1989. That's to a U.S. Department of Justice report in 1993, assembling the years of 84 to 90. Rape of women is also prevalent. Both rape and physical assault are acts of aggression. Both can and often do occur in marital and dating relationships, and both are potentiated by cultural practices that devalue and oppress women. Further, the goal for both social problems seems to be the same: reduce the incidence of changing cultural practice and men's behavior. In these cases, the focus of this paper is on battering in heterosexual intimate relationships, although the prevalence and some of the control dynamics may be similar for battering in lesbian and gay couples. Although the purview of behavior analysis, quote, encompasses contemporary scientific and social issues, unquote, that's from the ABAI, the index of the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, JABA, suggests that behavior analysis involvement in addressing the social problem of rape and battering of women has been minimal. The conceptual analysis of battering of women. The three-term contingency: antecedent, behavior, consequence. Antecedent is what happened before. Behavior is the measurable behavior. Consequence is what occurs afterward. Is a mainstay of behavior analysis, and the intra-couple dynamics of battering can be readily interpreted within such contingencies. Escape and avoidance of verbal abuse and physical assault are important in controlling a woman's performance of household chores and her sexual compliance. Sidman, 1989, observed that, quote, to make people do things that please us, we set up escape and avoidance contingencies. We keep beating them until they do what we want. We threaten them if they do anything else, unquote. Similarly, punishment controls a woman's assertion and refusal, and for many, her social contacts, working, and educational pursuit. Quote, a quick slap, a yell, or just a threatening gesture or look can be enough to make children, spouses, or pupils stop what they are doing, unquote. That's from Sidman, 1989. However, such simplified descriptions of events do not reflect the degree of suppression and control of behavior or the fear and pain of that a battered woman experiences. By the same token, a man sometimes receives positive reinforcers for using verbal and physical aggression. is verbal, in other words, manned, and emotional behavior are typically followed by positive or negative reinforcement in the form of the woman doing the desired household chores, preparing meals, keeping children quiet and cared for, with more leisure time for him, the husband, and being available for sex. Later on it says, in addition to reinforcement in the form of chores, services, and compliance, a man who controls his partner through coercion may receive peer approval and avoid ridicule and having his manhood questioned. Furthermore, it says later on in the article, there are punishing consequences when a woman tries to act outside the home to escape or avoid battering. Leaving the home has one negative reinforcing consequence: eliminating battering. On the other hand, leaving may produce a host of punishers. For example, leaving a familiar setting, crowded shelter, criticism from family and friends. Longer-term increases in response effort include finding a new place to live and a job or other means of support. The woman and her children usually end up with a lower economic standard of living than they have in present situation, another response cost for leaving. A frequent question concerning battered women is, quote, why do they stay, unquote. There are, of course, individual answers to this, but the consequences of leaving, typically behavior reducers with little positive reinforcement, provide some answers. It later on says, of the women murdered by their husbands, a majority are murdered while trying to leave or after they have left. And to clarify this in terms of behavior analysis, we got the term positive reinforcement. If we look at the effect on future behavior, positive reinforcement has an increase in future behavior. Okay, if whatever the stimulus is, this happens, and then we have an increase in future behavior. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. That is where you withdraw or decrease some type of stimulus, and you have an increase in future behavior. The punishment, the different positive and negative punishment, mean a decrease in future behavior. You present a stimulus and you have a decrease in future behavior. Traditions, models, and rules. Contingency specifying stimuli for battering. And a little later on in the article, after that heading, it says, Slinger and Blakely, that's Schlinger, and Blakely, Blakely, that was in 1994, describe how the functional properties of proximal, antecedent, and consequent stimuli can be altered by a background of rules and models for behavior. So the antecedent is the stimuli before, the consequent is then after. Such cultural practices, rules, and models, both peer and media-based, do not closely precede an instance of assault. That is, seeing a man grab or slap his partner in a film, a man does not turn to his wife and slap her, nor does he necessarily do it the next time they are in private. However, such models may increase the likelihood the man will use physical aggression to punish her assertive behavior or provide negative reinforcements for performing a chore. Slinger and Blakely, 1994, used the term contingency specifying stimulus for such temporarily remote but embedded cultural practices and rules. Another example of contingency specifying stimulus is the low probability of detection, arrest, prosecution, or conviction for assault of one's wife, that's Dutton, 1988, in spite of the fact that battering is a crime. Therefore, in communities in which there is a low probability of legal sanctions, battering is less likely to be suppressed in situations in which it produces reinforcement. Goes on later on, similarly, the U.S. Attorney General's Commission on Pornography in 1986 concluded that Sexually violent films increase the likelihood of sexually violent acts, although not necessarily soon after watching a violent film. Later on in this section, in summary, societal practices and rules, economic, domestic, legal, and institutional power and control overwhelmingly favor men. That's Yilo, 1993. Baum, 1994, describes power as the control each party in a relationship exerts over the other's behavior and contingencies. The patterns of behavior and discrepancies in power that favor men serve as contingency specifying stimuli for proximal three-term contingencies of battering for individual couples. In the next section, it says there are at least 4 categories of interventions to end battering. And they list these 4 categories they have in this article. Assistance for battered women, behavior-reducing legal and judicial consequences for batterers, programs to teach batterers non-abusive behavior, and changing of community mores. Available in the U.S. since 1965, battered women's shelters are usually in secret, secure locations so that a man cannot locate his partner naturally. However, going to a shelter can produce punishing consequences. Crowding, loss of privacy, loss of familiar setting and routine, and the daunting prospect of starting a new life. Interventions could help women to learn repertoires relevant to establishing a new life. Many battered women lack vocational skills and life skills such as driving, parenting, financial management, and choice-making. Behaviorally based training procedures using task-analyzed skills, videotape models, and response feedback be used to teach or improve these very skills. Later on it says the role of human services and healthcare professionals. Professionals have an important role in detecting battered women, providing support and treatment, and linking battered women to other services. Once abuse is detected, professional interventions can be directed at the psychological problems that battered women experience, in addition to physical trauma and injuries. These include alcoholism and substance abuse, depression, anxiety, isolation, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Although these can be treated directly, the woman should first be free of abuse. With all due regard for the psychological welfare of battered women, the focus here is on ending battering as opposed to mitigating its effects. And I read that line, and I'm not so quick to say that this isn't a good strategy or perhaps a good tactic to address some of the psychological problems that the victim has. This may be a kind of a problem. You could say attack it from all angles. And this is one angle, is to go to the victim and help resolve her problems. So that last line, I think it's something that could be researched. It could be tested how effective that means could be to addressing psychological problems and helping out the victim. Could be a method of reducing battering. But I'll go on here. Legal and judicial interventions. They've got the types of interventions. Another intervention is based on laws and that criminalize domestic violence that are present in all states. These laws provide potential batter-reducing consequences. They got in the parentheses punishers for batterers by explicitly making domestic assault a crime, strengthening protective or restraining orders, and allowing probable cause arrest, even mandating arrest in some states without warrant in suspected domestic assault. Many judicial units have established domestic violence courts, an indication of both the number of cases of abuse of women and the focusing of some judicial systems' efforts on this issue. They go on for the rationales for the continuing of arrest and prosecution. First, assault is a crime regardless of the relationship between the perpetrator and victim, and the domestic violence perpetrator should be treated as any other individual who assaults. Second, and more important, other interventions in addition to arrest and its sequela may be necessary to prevent abuse of women. Prosecution and strong sentences following conviction may be necessary. There's a fly here in the studio. I kind of want to batter it. Just flying around my screen. Also important are broader cultural changes in attitudes toward and treatment of women, as well as behavior change programs that teach men alternatives to abuse and that support behavior reducing consequences for abusive behavior. Later on it says, we know that the effectiveness of consequences depends on their immediacy, dependability, and magnitude. In this case, more immediate and dependable arrest and prosecution and strong sentences following conviction. First, written protocols can guide police, prosecutors, and judges in when and how to intervene. Second, behaviorally based training, task analyses, videotape models, and feedback could be provided to police, prosecutors, and judges with the goal of altering their skills and delivering consequences to batterers. Now that's really good. That's really getting to some criminal behaviorology here. Using these techniques in all sorts of settings, in all kinds of ways, to get an effective result. And that listing there of the task analyses, videotape models, feedback, providing that to police, judges, prosecutors, all with the same goal. They list here batterers, intervention programs. Intervention programs for batterers usually conducted with groups of men are a third strategy for eliminating battering. Similarly, it goes on later on, similarly, the pro-feminist model focuses on a man's learning substitute behaviors on the inherent sexism in culture, such as men's privilege or control their partners, and that's contingency specifying stimuli. Behavior analysis can get into some very profound issues, and I have nothing against the treatment of those using behavior analysis for treatment of autism, for developmental disabilities, but think how much more can be done, and it's not such a great leap. This article is listing it right now. It's the possibilities are maybe almost endless. Later on in the article, the training technology of videotape modeling, task analyze skills, checklist, rehearsal feedback, and homework practice could enhance learning of the skills in the program, report of abuse, assertiveness, and social skills, stress management, taking a time out. Incentives could be applied more systematically to improve program completion. I want to go to the next section, and it's on the implication for behavior analysts. The previous section described 4 of the interventions to end battering. Shelters for women to escape from the batterer and alternative repertoires for independence. Behavior reducing legal consequences for men. Acquisition of non-coercive skills for men and modification of the sociocultural contingency specifying stimuli. The ideal contribution for a behavior analyst to make would be multifaceted efforts involving several or all of these interventions. However, at least one issue that could impede behavior analysis, could impede behavior analysts, is that of measurement. The difficulties in doing direct observation of a couple's interactions may be a methodological barrier. The responses that transpire between a couple, especially in their home, have been considered private events. Jecker and Martin, both Jecker 1993, Martin 1983, accept that these private events occur within a marriage or family unit. It goes on later on, a benign view is that what transpires between a couple is their private business, And a patriarchal view is that, quote, a man's house is his castle, unquote, one of the contingency specifying stimuli that have enabled battering. He writes, another barrier to direct observation is the consequence of public scrutiny. A couple allowing in-home observers would open themselves and their relationship to scrutiny and embarrassment, and then man may receive community censure and legal sanctions. The fly is still here in the studio, and he's having a punishing effect on me. Later on in this section, behavior analysts have addressed other social issues for which direct observation of the target behavior was not feasible. They've got a little extended quote here in the article. Vandalism was the response of primary interest, but because acts of vandalism occur surreptitiously, they are essentially impossible to observe, and one must use indirect measures. In this case, it was decided that the products of vandalism would be measured by means of the cost required to repair the damage that had been caused. And that is an article by Mayer, Butterworth, Nafpaktitis, and Sulzer-Azaroff in 1983. And really what they're referring to here, and I'll go to the Applied Behavior Analysis, second edition, the old white book by Cooper, Heron, and Hayward. And they have a section on page 95, measuring behavior by permanent products. Measuring behavior after it has occurred by measuring the effects of that behavior produced on the environment is known as measurement by permanent product. Measuring permanent products is an ex post facto method of data collection because measurement takes place after the behavior has occurred. A permanent product is a change in the environment produced by a behavior that lasts long enough for measurement to take place. So you can see a lot of these, what would seem to be daunting problems, there are already methods in place to resolve that. Permanent product in this case, in the case of vandalism and in other kinds of crimes. In addition to vandalism, other studies in Java that did not measure the target behavior directly include ones involving adult and juvenile offenders, abused and neglected children, industrial safety. Target behaviors were selected that adequately reflected the problem behaviors or were products of the problem behaviors, such as time lost, number of injuries, dollar cost, that kind of thing. Similarly, many of the products and other factors related to abuse of women are publicly accessible. One set of measures is protective requests and actions, calls to police, police interventions, arrests, charges filed, cases prosecuted, convictions, and sentences. It goes on, health-related variables include the number of abused women who seek medical and psychological treatment, number of injuries, and numbers of murders. Later on, media, having more examples of this, media and other societal variables include types of roles of women in television and movies, and job and pay equity for women. In addition, subjective measures have been acceptable almost since the inception of the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. They just listed as JABA, JABA here. Although such measures have been used mainly as adjuncts to more objective observational data, Wolf, 1978. In Battering research, a woman's reports of aggression by her husband and its effects, for example, fear, etc., and Shelter's views on whether Batterers programs are effective are examples of verbal responses of subjective measures. They can be used to support more objective data, such as the number of shelter beds, number of men arrested for completing a Batterers program, or television advertisements showing a neighbor calling the police. In his conclusion section, Myers writes, it seems that our profession has been looking the other way from the social problems of rape and battering. Yet behavior now, they've been looking away from all crime, period, or except in a few exceptional cases. in the literature. Yet behavior analysts should be comfortable working in the field of domestic violence, in which most workers agree that the target behavior is overt. In other words, what a man says and does to his partner. Most workers also agree that battering is learned and is not attributable to mental or psychiatric problems. This review provides behavior analysts with an overview of the field of abuse of women. Flagship journals of other professions have recently featured sections on battering and sexual assault. It goes into more of that. But a lot of these are psychology and medical journals. It's unfortunate that behavior analysis was not represented in these. So Bear, Wolf, and Riesly in 1968 identified social relevance as the applied feature of applied behavior analysis. We have studied and intervened on behalf of numerous clientele: the developmentally disabled, the chronic mentally ill, prisoners, management workers, and students. By its prevalence, effects, and longevity, abuse of women is certainly a candidate for our involvement. Battering is an unmet challenge for our discipline, as well as inevitably in the lives of many of us and our friends. Okay, that article, once again, that was by David L. Myers of Edison Community College. It was in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis in the winter 1995 edition, Eliminating the Battering of Women by Men, Some Considerations for Behavior Analysis. We are going to have another part to this subject matter, so there's going to be a follow-up to this in our next broadcast. I hope you have enjoyed it. A very good article. Good because I think it expands what we can do with our field, and it really brings into focus what could be the focus, one of them, for criminal behaviorology. I am your host, Timothy Joseph.